Hello and welcome to Culture Conversations. I'm Craig Foreman, your guide through the ever-evolving world of organizational culture. Here we engage in real, unscripted conversations with the changemakers actively shaping our workplaces. From innovative strategies to heartfelt insights, each conversation is a step towards making work better for us all. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Culture Conversations. Hello and welcome to Culture Conversations. Today, my guest is Gogi Anand, who is a principal people scientist at Microsoft Viva. Prior to joining Microsoft, he served as a senior people science consultant at LinkedIn, Glint, when Glint was part of LinkedIn, and now that's all rolled up into Microsoft. His work involves partnering with senior leaders to leverage data for addressing challenges and identifying opportunities in the realm of human resources. Before his tenure at LinkedIn and Glint, Anand held various roles at organizations. He was the senior manager, future of work at Indigo, a senior consultant at Deloitte, and he also held positions at Gallup as a learning and development consultant. So lots of good background here. His contributions at Microsoft and previous organizations have been centered on building more collaborative, equitable, and innovative working environments. And at the heart of his professional ethos is a strong commitment to using data-driven insights to foster better workplaces and enhance employee engagement. And his expertise in the future of work and employee engagement has positioned him as a thought leader in the field, and also something we share a close connection to on is that data-driven insights. If you know anything about my work, also helping organizations do just that. And also the reason we got to know one another. Gogi had reached out to me leading up to a conference where we were both speaking, and I opened his profile and saw that he was a people scientist. And I thought, a people scientist like me. There just aren't many people with the title people scientist in the world. And, there he was. And I was so curious to learn more about his work and what he was doing at LinkedIn at the time compared to what I was doing at Culture Amp. So we had a few conversations, sharing notes. What do you do? What do I do? And we found that there's a lot of similarities. And what we're trying to do inside of organizations and helping organizations, move the needle and do it in a data-driven way. So I would say at the heart of his work is that ethos and that strong commitment to the insights. But his expertise also in the space is just really obvious. And every time we speak, I walk away smarter and I feel like I've upped my skill set. So I'm really grateful. And I was like, well, I'm going to do this podcast. I should have Gogi with us so we can, skill everybody up. So some of the things we spoke about today, exploring the future of work. So the intersection of data and human behavior and how we shape our organization and our strategies. Redefining performance management. So offering new insights into what drives high performance in our work environments today, something also I spend a lot of time thinking about and still trying to unlock. And the art of building trust through data, which again, so important, the importance of using data responsibly and fostering cultures of trust within organizations. And how can we do that while collecting information and data? So I'm going to get right to it. Welcome, my friend, Gogi Anand.
Good to be here with you, Craig.
Good to see you again. It's been a while. Thank you for joining me, and I'm sure it will come out all over the place today, but I'm really excited, in these conversations, talking to lots of different people in the space. But you're another people scientist, and I always think that's really neat because there's few of us in the world that I met you because you do this work, and we've worked for different organizations doing the same thing. So I'm just so excited to talk to somebody that I think sees and does the same sort of work that I do, but also it's just going to be a great conversation. So thanks for joining.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And this is such an exciting time to be a part of this space, isn't it?
Tell me about it. I can't wait to hear more, but I've often said that, I felt like prior to COVID, there was a lot of talk about what it's going to be, the future of work. It's just kind of this wax poetic sort of ideology. And I thought this during COVID, but I believe it more now than ever that for anybody that has been passionate or interested and wants to make a difference, I can't think that there's probably not a better time than right now to rethink and put some of those ideas into action to really craft what's next. What do you think? How do you frame it?
Along those lines, very similar. I think there's an opportunity to either change with the times or be left behind. And I think organizations that take advantage of being agile and adaptive right now will find themselves in a competitive spot with their competitors. But companies that kind of stay stagnant or don't innovate at this time right now, they may find it hard to compete in whatever market they're competing in.
Yeah. Look, the question that I want to ask, I'm going to ask in a second, is just we'll start with how data plays into that. But before we do, for those listening, a little background about yourself, so people know who we're talking to and kind of what your journey's been to get you to this point. And then we'll get into that. We'll ask that question of like how does data play a role into all this? But a little bit about you.
Sure. I'm actually in my dream job right now. I'm a principal people scientist at Microsoft. I get to understand human behavior through data. And my journey has been interesting because I started my career thinking I wanted to be a banker, a trader in the front office, trading fixed income securities. And I spent a bit of time in banking early in my career. And then I realized that I really enjoyed data, but I was missing the behavioral element that I was so passionate about. So I went back to school, focused on human behavior and marketing in my MBA, and then combined the passion for data and human behavior. And then in the last decade or so, I've had the privilege of working with several executives across various Fortune 500 companies to focus on organizational transformation, culture change, and various projects across the employee experience lifecycle. And today, I'm part of a team that helps clients figure out how to help their people be happier and more successful at work.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, so much. One is how many people in the world have people scientists as a title. So that's always been a rare thing, and then
Yeah.
you and I share that. We also share some history. I came up, spent some time at LinkedIn. You were at LinkedIn with Glint, and then Glint eventually, with the whole Microsoft acquisition. So we share some interesting professional overlap as well. Well, let's go there. Let's talk about. Let's just stay really big picture right now on this idea of data, because I think sometimes when people hear that word, I judge that it can sound stagnant, sound not interesting, but what you just shared, this idea of merging data with behavior, and I think that's also what drove me. And even when you put it that way, it helps me summarize. Because I would never call myself a data person before, but I do love the data merged with like being able to create context. So how do you see it? And it was particularly around organizations, like back to that original question around where does data play in this new world of where we're going and how organizations need to be thinking?
Yeah, I always think about, if I'm a leader in an organization, how can I help shepherd the organization towards how people are naturally thinking, feeling, and behaving in their normal lives, in their day to day lives outside of work. So I think about when I'm a regular consumer outside of work, I go online, I do some shopping, I'm clicking around, doing things, wasting time on social media, all those things. And the natural behavior there is to click around and then things come to you as a result of you clicking around a bunch. And so in organizations, if we can get more sophisticated about what are people doing day to day in their behaviors and how can we understand that behavior through data so we can make informed decisions about how to support our people to help them be happier and more successful at work. And that's kind of the holy grail, I think, for an organization right now is if they can figure out how do we do this effectively and at scale and in a streamlined way, they can really help their people be at their best every day.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that I also, especially, you and I work with organizations, 200, 300, 500, 1,000, 10,000 larger organizations. And I think there's something that happens as organizations get bigger where leaders think they're getting data. They're having the same number of conversations they were having when they were a smaller organization. Yet when you talk about data at scale, it's something also I think a lot about, and the ahas and the learnings that can, and I don't know about you, but so many times what I find is that when we bring data to the table, oftentimes we validate some of the things they've been thinking, which is great. Like, okay, good. You're right there. I always find that there's a section, especially with first time rolling out, large surveys with organizations, is that I'm telling leaders things that go against what they believed. And it sort of scares me a little bit too, because it makes me realize when I walk into a new organization or organizations that aren't really being thoughtful about their approach to data, it's like once you've seen how many decisions are being made that impact lives that are off the mark or don't really have the significance that they feel, I don't know, is that when I share that, is that something that you've experienced, or in your journey when you work with these large sets of data and helping organizations rethink their approach?
Yeah, I think data helps bring some credibility, uh, w- rather than making some. I think our CEO, like Satya, likes to say, um, dogma or data over dogma. So not leading with kind of your intuition or what you think, but bringing data to the table to make decisions. And I think that's important. And the other thing I'll say is, once you have that data in front of you as a leader, especially about engagement or the employee experience, I think the next step then is to then have a conversation about it, whether it's with your leaders, your employees. That data to me is a starting point to really understand things and understand the complexity or the nature of what you're dealing with. The second layer of that is validating that, like you said just now, is am I understanding this correctly? Am I looking into my hypotheses correctly? And then taking actions to validate that with your peers, with your people, and then marrying those two pieces of data, and taking action. And right now, what we do in our employee experience space is we have kind of three buckets. We call it a holistic listening strategy. So the first bucket is where you have your traditional surveys. You would have your employee engagement survey. You might do a D&I survey, 360 feedback, things like that. That's your traditional surveys. And that gives you how people feel day to day about a particular topic. Then you have kind of your passive data that your organization is collecting just in the background through your HRIS systems, through Viva Insights. We can collect now data from Microsoft 365 and how people are engaging in emails, or how much focus time they have on their calendar. So we can start to see passive data and human behavior. And then the third bucket is around social rhythms. So, how are people engaging on your social platforms? And this is fascinating because you start to understand what people are saying when they're not in a formal conversation. How are people interacting? What are the types of questions or language that people are using? And these three things together give you some really powerful information about how people are thinking, feeling, and behaving in an organization. And as a leader, this is really powerful because when it comes to making decisions about setting people up for success or helping people unlock blockers, it's really valuable information.
Yeah. It's so two things I think about when you mention that. One is it's a lot of information. So how do we support, right? Because, gosh, if you think about it, even 5, 10 years ago, information was floating around. So we can hit on that, this idea of how do we synthesize and help our managers, because it's what you just mentioned is amazing and can be overwhelming, and almost we're paralyzed by it. And the other thing that I would want to dig into with that, and I imagine you hear this a lot too, is when you explain it that way, or when I talk about this, I'm thinking about people listening to this and they're like, oh, that's scary, all that data they're collecting. So how do we do it responsibly? Because I've always been big on that, this is, if done the wrong way, we can almost undermine what we're trying to do if people feel they're being taken advantage of, so I guess those are the two. One is how do we help, because we have access to so much. How do we help support our leaders and managers? And number two, the responsibility approach to how do we should we be thinking about this and being responsible, so we're not becoming part of the problem in the end.
Yeah, this two really good observations here. The first one around action taking and helping managers really simplify. I think that's exactly it. We want to not boil the ocean with any sort of data that we're looking at, but instead to pull out the one or two interesting nuggets of information and then really help managers focus on that and leaders focus on one thing or two things that they can do really well that's within their control, and do that regularly. Build rhythms of action that allow you to incrementally improve the way you do things. So when you look back over a year, you say, wow, our team has really performed differently than we did the prior year. And it's because of those incremental actions. So I think that's one thing, is to help managers identify habits and behaviors that are minute. And so that's kind of at the micro level. But then at the macro level, when you think about responsibility, we want leaders to be role modeling these things on a day-to-day basis in their communication, in artifacts, in how they show up in meetings, how they're communicating day to day. I think all of these things are important to display how you're leveraging data or even AI responsibly. Um, and I think that is a pretty big task for leaders right now.
Yeah. And that to me sounds like the tools you're working on, the tools I've worked on is really the true art here is how do we take those large sets of data and position them and create context for the people looking at these easily, and not for just one small group of people in a people analytics team, but for every manager, leader, executive. So I think that's the art here of the work that we do is how do we take that information and present it in a way that says, look here, focus on this. This will have the biggest impact, and try not to overwhelm the individual. Maybe that's that problem with that word data is we get, oh, it's too much, it's overwhelming. The idea is it's not data, it's the stories and the insights. How can we leverage that data? And then what about from a responsibility perspective to the employee as we're moving into this world of being able to access so much of this information? Both, I love that you said passive. I use that too, active and passive data. Passive meaning you can just pull it. You can pull it out of your HRIS, you can pull it out of your Salesforce, whatever. No one knows the difference versus when you run a survey, when you go out to, which is I call that active data. That's, and I think sometimes leaders think of all data as the same and they forget, what's going on and the message is being sent. So yeah, let's just open that up a little bit, kind of responsibility and collecting this data and leveraging it.
Yeah, I think a lot of leaders and managers get nervous when when you receive results back from a survey. The natural reaction is, "Oh, what are people saying about our team?" It's natural human behavior to get defensive about it. But I think what really powerful leaders do is lean into that data and say, what can I learn from this? And what are people telling me that maybe is a blind spot for me or that I'm not picking up on in my day to day? And the way to lean into that is invite people into the conversation to say, am I understanding this data correctly or these data correctly? And so let's have a conversation about it. And when you start to have those conversations, you start to really paint the picture of what's actually happening within the team. Because to be frank, if you don't have a culture of psychological safety in your organization, the results you get back in the data or the questions that you ask may not be 100% accurate. And I hate to say that, but I think that's kind of what I see in organizations where there's not a lot of psychological safety. The data to me feels massaged. It feels like people aren't truly saying what they want. And so I think the way to get people to feel like their voice is being heard is for leaders to then respond to the data, to say, I heard you, here's what we're doing about it. And sometimes it requires saying, I heard you, but we're not in a position to act on what you're giving feedback on. And here's why. And so being really clear about that and making those connections on a regular basis, anytime you ask for feedback, is critical to bringing your people along, because I think people are very savvy now, and they appreciate when you recognize what they're saying, even if it means giving them some news to say, we can't follow through on what you're asking for, but just closing that loop is so powerful.
Yeah, I agree. And oftentimes, I've had that conversation so many times where somebody says, well, they don't trust, or I'm not sure, we only got 60% participation. Can we, what's that mean? And I always go back and say to the leaders, but that is the data you have right now. How about instead of putting it on them and saying they don't trust, and I also believe that there's a long, long history for reasons why employees don't trust employers. So now if you're in a position of a leadership or manager, how do you unpack that versus put that back on them? Meaning, okay, go there and show them that you heard them. No one's going to, it's not going to be, there is no punishment that, you picked one thing, you're doing something. So it's this idea of teaching the leaders, use this and lead by example to change the equation versus getting frustrated because of the way it is. And if you think about it, if you do your research, there's a lot of reasons why that sentiment is there. So, if you didn't get a lot of responses, then say, this is what we got. This is what we heard. So here's one thing we're going to do. We're going to do this again in 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
My sentiment and what I've seen is that if you do that thing, your participation will creep up and start to go up, and then move the needle through your action, lead by example. And the second part you said, I think comes up often too. I've worked a lot with organizations to not just the leadership, but how do we drive this all the way down into the teams? So there are times where a team will look at results, and say, maybe it has to do with career trajectory is one of the big things that comes out of the survey. Well, you might not be able to fix that at the team level. So I think for managers say, okay, let's look at all these. We realize this is probably the biggest one, but second is recognition and rewards. So maybe this is something at a team level we can deal with. So I think it hits on that same thing that you just spoke about of being honest that maybe some of these things the organization can take on, but some of these things the team can take on, and driving home that it's not just about the survey. It's that we heard you, we're listening, we're being thoughtful about our approach. Here's, we're asking the right questions, and like, what's one or two things we can do today at whatever size and scope and influence we have the ability to do it.
Absolutely. And I think one thing I would add to that is like leaders sometimes wait for HR or somebody else to kick off a survey or to say, be nudged to then do something. But I think really powerful leaders understand that they're leading a team and they treat it like they're leading a business. And I'll give you an example of in real life, or outside of my work life, I should say, not in real life, because we are in real life. um, I went to get a massage a few days ago, and I think about like, if I were to go to a different massage place, what would make me want to go to a different massage place? And from the business's standpoint, they should be thinking, why did this person not come back to me? Because a massage is kind of like personal. It's you appreciate the quality, you appreciate so many things about wherever you go for a massage. And so if that person is not coming back regularly, they're not building that loyalty. I would want to ask, why am I not building that loyalty with this customer? Because we have a great setup here. So it's the same thing with teams. If people are leaving your team or wanting to do something different pretty quickly after they join your team, as a leader, I want to be asking, why is it everyone can't possibly be on a growth journey that joins my team and a year or two later want to shift into a new role? So if I'm a leader and I'm seeing some of this turnover in my team, I want to be asking those things. Or you may start getting clues about people's behavior. They may not be as engaged, may not be speaking up as they used to. So various clues that you can get as a leader to say, I'm not building the loyalty that I thought I was. And if not, how can I shift my behaviors to do so?
Yeah. I love such a good example too, but I thought in retail, particularly when you talked about the massage, the one challenge, and I think this holds true with employees, is that, I remember in school, we studied this, and something they were talking about, particularly like if you're a drive-through, that if somebody pulls in the lines too long, they're like, I'm not waiting, and they leave. You, as a business, you never know. So Gogi, if you were not to return, the challenge is the business might not know. Where I'm going is sometimes listen to the people that are there, because once they leave, it's hard. So that's the idea of the stay interviewer, right? Talk to your people about what is it that they like about being there. Why? So you're learning from your clients to make sure that you continue to focus on that, because once they're gone, sometimes it's very tricky, or to get information, it's going to be different. So to the same point of like, learn about what makes it valuable. And also when you were talking, I thought about something I think that the data has helped, this idea of taking yourself out of the equation for a manager. Like you said, it is very personal. It's hard. I think when they trust it and it's done well and they use good tools, it kind of allows them out to then they can do it without, that's tricky for a manager. But a great manager has to see the playing field without themselves on it. And some good data will help them, and then they can think more like a coach,
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I was thinking about the book called The Trusted Advisor, as you talked about managers and lowering their self-orientation, because there's an equation that David Meister, who's the author of The Trusted Advisor, he's a professor at Harvard, and he talks about this equation on how to build trust with your team. And the top part of the equation is credibility, reliability, and intimacy. And so you want to demonstrate that you're credible, you're reliable, and you can go and have an intimate relationship with that individual on a deeper level, so you can discuss deeper topics. The bottom part of that equation, it's all divided by self-orientation. And so the way to build high trust is to lower your self-orientation as a manager or a leader, or even as an individual. And it's to focus on credibility, reliability, and intimacy. How do you create relationships with people where you're delivering value, you're listening and acting on what people are saying, and really actively listening to what they're saying. So I think those things really help you build trust.
Yeah. Okay, I see, 30 minutes. So we're going to switch gears because I imagine if somebody was listening to you and me, I'm imagining the audience, here we are. We've been doing this work for many years. We've been listening to organizations using data. We've gone through COVID now. So let's talk about what do we see? What's I guess the big question here is the shifting behaviors. What is different? What do you think is staying the same? So yeah, maybe you and I can talk a little bit about that, put some context around what we think is happening in the world right now and how this all plays in data and the future and our workplaces. What are you seeing as a big shift?
Yeah, well, let me start with maybe why this is important. So 10 years ago, 33% of the companies that were on the S&P 500 are no longer on that list anymore. And if I think about any company that's reached 100 million users today, for example, LinkedIn took 7 years to reach 100 million users. Facebook took 4.5 years, Instagram 2.5 years, TikTok 9 months, ChatGPT 2 months, and Threads 2 days. So the world that we're living in right now is ripe with change. And so as an organization, we need to be thinking about how do we change or evolve our personality as an organization? How do we evolve our culture, our values, our mission as the market evolves? So I think the why is really important. And so how do you do this effectively? I think you start with kind of your macro and your micro culture. I talked about this a little earlier, but I think it also starts with understanding what data is important to collect. What do we need to understand? What hypothesis are we trying to test with the organization? And how can we do that effectively over time?
And this use of data now, I've never heard anybody put it, and I know I'll reference this again, the way how you just put it, with the speed of all of this happening, which speaks really, elegantly to this, just the speed of the movement of everything. And where does the power of data, is it more critical now than ever? Is it just the same? How do you see this current world and the need to be leveraging data around our people and culture, compare and contrast to before and now?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand why we're looking at this data. Like, what are we trying to learn? And having that growth mindset, not just to say, I have this data set in front of me, and I have some conclusions I can draw, and ta-da, that's the answer. But instead saying, okay, this is interesting. Here's an insight. Now let me go and test that insight. How can I change some things? And we think about, making it really relevant. People talk about the hybrid work environment that we're in right now. A lot of companies have been toying with the idea of, should it be 3 days a week? Should it be 4 days a week? I had one executive say to me, we made people come back 5 days a week, because we knew that there'd be some pushback. And so we landed on 3 days a week. And now everyone feels very happy about it because we started with 5. So it's kind of a negotiation tactic.
Were you working with them around surveying? This is so awesome. I love what you just put out there because the executive now told you that everybody's so happy about it. I'm curious, did the data back that up?
So the data showed us that people wanted to be in the office less than 5 days a week. And so it almost felt like they got to the employee's perspective, but almost started at a completely different perspective, intentionally knowing that they would negotiate back to
That was
3.
the idea. Let's start heavy, knowing that then we can work our way backwards, and it will.
Right. And so the thing about that approach is that you're using the data, but not really. And so how do you do it more effectively as an organization to build trust? Because those kind of things over time will erode trust in an organization. So how do you build that trust? And I think the way that you do it in this environment is creating not just an overarching policy that is kind of intended one size fits all, but creating a policy of some sort, but then allowing teams and leaders to make some strategic decisions within their teams. So providing that flexibility and agility to still meet the business needs, but also have some flexibility within the team.
There it is. It's so fun to talk because I can hear these same themes, and you and I don't talk all that often. So to hear that I think we're looking at the world through the same lens. But it sounds, and I was gonna ask you about this RTO, the return to office stuff. How because of the work I do, imagine because of the work you do, it's the hot topic, and people always ask, "What do you think? Where do you stand?" And I think because of my work with data, I'm always like, I don't really care. How about you listen and you make a data informed decision?
Right.
If you have accountants and you're insisting they all come back, or a group of them's back, and you realize that those that work remote are 15 points happier around engagement than those that aren't, and you're seeing production and performance is lower. I'm hard pressed to think if I could sit with the CEO and lay it out like that and say, now make a business decision. And it's what frustrates me is all I hear is that man or that woman decided that everybody comes first. I don't really care. If it's a hospital, I probably want you back in the office, and maybe it makes sense. But if it's, an accountant that has to give up 2 hours of their time each day and they're miserable, and it's just because somebody's holding on to the past, that's where I get frustrated. Like,
Right.
let's optimize using data for what makes most sense. And everybody wants to take a position, and it's just, I don't know how much that my work has changed me, but it's nice to talk to you because it sounds the same way. Like, I don't really care. I care about building organizations that are designed to do what they say they're going to do, and do it in a way that keeps their people happy, and that they're clear in communicating why they do what they do. And I think that's where the data is so powerful, and oftentimes not used or leveraged.
Yeah, I think some of our research at Microsoft shows us that there's a few reasons why people would want to go into the office. And I'm talking about people who are typically in front of a computer, not frontline employees. There's some compelling reasons. I'm not saying that you would abandon the office and not go in, but there's some clear reasons which we see in our research. One is around you're starting a new role, and it's helpful to meet some team members. That's a valuable time to go in office. You're starting a new project or joining a new team. That's another compelling reason to go in. And the third reason is really you want to collaborate or build team cohesion. You want to see your team more regularly. And those are all valid reasons to go in.
So how
Uh,
did Because I Said So score?
right.
Like,
We see that come
this
up.
is true. Like, be thoughtful
Yeah.
based on data. These are the reasons why people want to come together. Let's do it in that way. Like, versus there's no data based, like, every time he needs a story about the executive that just decided. And I was like, well, where's that come from?
Well, you know why I think this happens sometimes? Because I actually think it's a lot harder to intentionally create an environment with some purpose behind it. And what I mean by that is, if I know that team cohesion is something that we want to focus on and bring people together for, to do that effectively, you need to have a whole day, 2 days, a week. You need to thoughtfully bring those people together and have something set up for them. Otherwise, the reaction is, well, I just came into the office and spent a lot of my time commuting, and I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm on a Zoom call or a Teams call, and I'm just doing the same thing I was doing at home. So there's no real added benefit here. And so it requires a lot of work to be able to construct an experience like that for people.
That's right. I mean, even when you say it, yeah, you're right. And the idea of it's just, I think some people, it's a programmed, it used to be, it just was. And I think leaders that came up in a different way want to get that back. There's a level of control, and but it's just not there. And to your point, yeah, maybe maybe it's when the money we start saving on offices, we spend on experienced designers and people that come in and help us really think about how we gather intentionally, and it's not a default. I see we have a few more minutes here. I want to switch gears real quickly because I think there's something else that you and I both think about, and I want to talk about before we break, and that's performance management. And you had mentioned to me that there's kind of a way that you think about performance. Maybe is there an equation, this new performance equation? So I'm just curious, how do you think about performance, and how does performance tie into this whole engagement?
Yeah, this is very much related to what we were just talking about, where there's a rising work tension right now. 3 years ago, employees were very well cared for when the pandemic started. Everyone kind of shifted gears. They really doubled down, making sure people were supported, frontline and back office. All employees were supported. Fast forward 3 years to today, and over the last year, all I hear from my customers is, we're trying to do more with less. We're trying to be more efficient and effective in our processes. And it's this awkward tension between engagement, people wanted to be engaged at work, and now productivity. And so there's this tension between the two. But what we see is that these two together actually really drive and sustain high levels of performance in an organization when done effectively, because they're mutually reinforcing. When people are happy at work, they're more likely to be productive. And when they're more productive, they're more likely to be happy at work. And so we need both of these things, engagement and productivity, to really drive high performance.
Yeah. I've often thought about that too. And this idea of, what is burnout really? Because I can tell you that I've had jobs where I'm just miserable and 40 hours a week causes burnout. And I've had jobs I'm so engaged that I can work 60 hours a week and I'm just so happy. So I think I think that's where the engagement piece plays in. This idea of it's just about hours and time in is not true. When people are fundamentally connected, feeling like they're creating something good in the world, they're like, I think for a lot of people, collaboration and feeling like together we're doing something bigger than any one of us could have done. And it has to do something with our purpose and why we're here, and we're growing and developing. That it's amazing what will happen. So I think rethinking this idea of burnout is not just an hours equation. It's really it's
Hmm.
we're listening and we're really developing, designing the right types of teams, and giving them those great experiences. I think the performance is the outcome. And it's funny because we do all this stuff and put people in offices and have them stay there longer, and often has, I bet, your performance is lower than it would be if they were working 70% of the time happily.
Hmm.
Um,
And that's the difference between, I guess, hedonic and eudaimonic happiness, right? Like, hedonic says, you get pleasure from certain activities. Like if I play golf, I'm very happy for a temporary period of time. But what engagement is truly measuring at the organizational level is eudaimonic happiness, which is, how are people driven by a purpose or a mission? And if we can get that going for people in an organization, they're much more likely to sustain that happiness, and therefore be more productive at work.
well, I think that's a perfect way. We're going to end there with hedonic versus Eden. What was it? Edonomic?
Hedonic happiness versus eudaimonic.
Eudaimonic happiness. So there's a powerful concept, but that's a great one, right? This idea of doing it just for yourself versus doing, the pleasure that you get out of this collective. And um, Gogi, it's just awesome to connect with somebody that thinks like I do, that's seeing the world the same way, that has supported organizations with data, that holds a people scientist title, one of the wildest titles I've ever had. I just really appreciate you taking the time. I always enjoy our talks, and thank you, because I know that this whole thing is all about free form and going where it goes. So thanks for trusting me in that journey. But I really enjoyed this conversation. I think many others will, and I just wanted to thank you and appreciate you for taking the time.
Sure, absolutely. And if anyone's listening or watching, please connect with us. We are culture ambassadors at heart. We like to build communities and connect with people who share in the same thinking, to help people be
How
happier
can
and more
people connect with
successful.
you? Is there a best way to connect with you?
Yeah, I think reach out on LinkedIn, drop a quick line. Don't just send a generic request, but let me know why you want to connect, what you're hoping to learn, and maybe we can share some learnings together.
I mean, my whole belief is that this change that we talk about happening is only going to happen if we connect with one another, come together, and leverage the strength of all of us. So I think to that point, like, let's all stay connected and build a really strong community of people supporting one another to make this change happen.
Love it. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.